By now, you should have read chapter 3. And this chapter, which talks about the federal budget process, and the institutions behind the federal budgeting process, gives you an explanation as to how the federal government develops its budget, how it appropriates its budget, um, and how budgeting authority works at the federal level. So now I'm going to turn the table for a second and talk briefly about superfunctions. Now, in our last discussions, you read and you heard me talk about funds, okay? And funds primarily are existent at the state and local levels. State and local governments generally use fund accounting. And if you recall, I talked about GASB, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. And GASB highly recommends that state and local governments operate off of fund accounting. However, at the federal level, it's a different story. Okay, the federal government does not operate in funds. The federal government, unlike state and local governments, does not have an operating and a capital budget. It just has one budget. Okay, and so where the state and local governments separate their expenditures and revenues by funds, the federal government basically categorizes its spending or outlays, if you will, by superfunctions. Okay, superfunctions are major categories of expenditures that define how the federal government spends its money. Now, within some superfunctions, you will notice there are functions. Okay, functions are more specified categories that may give you detail as to what department falls within what category. Now keep in mind, not all superfunctions will contain functions. Okay, so looking at the spreadsheet here, this right here is a breakdown of the federal government's budget between 2011 and estimates 2021. Okay, and you'll notice here the bold categories in the left-hand column, right, are superfunctions. Okay, so we have national defense, which is super function, human resources, which is a super function, physical resources, which is another super function. Then we have other functions and other things like interest and other outlay type categories. But going back up to human resources, for example, you'll notice that human resources has subcategories: education, training, employment, and social services, health, Medicare, income security, Social Security, on and off budget, veterans benefits. All of those are functions within the superfunction of human resources. Again, looking at physical resources, right? We have energy, we have natural resources and environment, we have commerce and housing credit, we have transportation, we have community and regional development, and things of that nature. Then other functions, we have international affairs, general science, space and technology, agriculture, administration of justice, general government, and allowances. Okay, now let's look over at 2014, for example. 2015 was the last number to be actually recorded outside of estimates. They have not provided a superfunction breakdown yet, not to my knowledge. But anyway, looking at this spreadsheet right here, our largest superfunction category, if you will, is actually human resources. Okay, and if you look at that, right, that includes things like Medicare, income security, Social Security, and education. This is the largest component of our federal budget. If you look at national defense is roughly $603 billion. Okay, now keep in mind, not all defense expenditures or outlays are on budget. So this does not include all national defense, but this is what we are allowed to list as being allocated. Okay, and our smallest number, or rather our smallest superfunction, falls under the area of physical resources. Okay, now I provided here on this next slide just kind of a graphic breakdown of superfunctions as of 2014. And again, you can look at my coloring is a little off here, chalks it up to technology. But human resources, again, is the largest piece of this pie here. Okay. Um, and we have, of course, national defense is the second largest, and then other functions, and then we have net interest and physical resources, which is the smallest, of course. Now let's look at a breakdown of human resources. Okay, looking at human resources, Social Security looks like it makes up the largest of human resources, which is roughly $865 billion. Now, if you think back to chapter 3, Mike Sell talked about discretionary and non-discretionary federal spending. And if you recall, Social Security is a non-discretionary expenditure type item, which basically means that Congress cannot cut Social Security, right? Or the president cannot cut Social Security out of the budget. In order to alter the expenditures for Social Security, it would basically take a congressional act to do that, right? So therefore, non-discretional spending such as Social Security, veterans benefits, and Medicare, I believe, are things that cannot be touched in the budget. So these things that have to be funded no matter what.